Listen, the world you call solid is assembled moment by moment from a storm of possibilities. Science tells us that at the most minute scale, things do not sit patiently in fixed shapes. They exist as shimmering clouds of potential, as if the universe hangs in suspense, offering outcomes like cards held close to the chest. Then something happens. A measurement, an attention, and the cloud contracts into a particular card, a particular form, a particular event. That contraction is not something happening only in distant laboratories. It is happening every second around you, inside you, and because of you. When I say you are the measuring device, I mean this literally and poetically. Your attention, in its quiet and its fury, is a kind of instrument. It is not separate from the machinery of reality. It is a participant. Think of attention as a lamp in a dark room of possibilities. Wherever the lamp sweeps, possibilities gather into edges. Colors harden, textures become real. When attention looks away, those possibilities dissolve back into potential. This is not a mystical metaphor that ignores reason. It is a practical hypothesis consistent with the findings of modern physics. It also happens to be a spiritual secret that every contemplative tradition has known in one way or another. Where you place your mind shapes the cinema of your life. But there is a moral subtlety here. The measuring instrument is not neutral. It carries preferences, histories, habits, fears. Your habitual attention, the stories you run about yourself, the grudges you replay, the anxieties you feed, biases the outcomes you experience. If you feed a lamp with the oil of worry, its light will pick out anxious textures in your world. If you train the lamp on curiosity, you will begin to notice windows you didn't see before. This idea changes responsibility. You are less of a passive passenger and more of a practicing artisan of reality. That's not to say you control everything. Far from it. The quantum domain is probabilistic. What you influence are tendencies and biases, not tyrannical guarantees. Still, the realization that your attention participates gives you a tool. Everyday life becomes an experimental theater, where simply becoming mindful of where you look and why can shift what appears. So begin practice here. Recognize attention as an instrument. Notice where it is restless and where it lingers. Name your habitual settings. Fear, nostalgia, ambition, and see how they color immediate perception. The first step is simple. Become the curious witness of your own measuring. With that simple act, you begin to alter the laboratory parameters of your life. Imagine for a moment an old phonograph record. The record holds potential songs in encoded grooves, but no music exists until the needle rests and vibrates. Attention is that needle. It must touch the record to produce sound. In the same way, your focus physically couples to the field of possibilities and produces a particular melody of life. Slight alterations in where and how the needle descends produce wholly different music. This needle metaphor has consequences for how you handle distraction. Modern life is a cacophony of 50 little needles poking at your record notifications, obligations, other people's sharp edges. Each automatic poke influences the music that plays in your inner world. When attention is fragmented, outcomes become jittery and incoherent. When attention is concentrated, outcomes gain fidelity. Intentions translate into clearer results. Now, the point is not to preach heroic concentration like a hermit on a mountain. The trick is finessely learn to let your attention be a skilled needle that can hover, drop, retrace, and glide. There is artistry in smallness. A single minute of undivided attention to a thought, a breath, a task, recalibrates the grooves your life records into. Over time, these micro adjustments compound. The composition that seemed inevitable becomes plastic and malleable. Also understand that the needle carries charge. It is not a neutral instrument. Where you place it repeatedly, grooves deepen, habits form. If you repeatedly needle the record with complaint, hesitation, grooves deepen, and you will find the world playing a repetitive lament. Conversely, when you repeatedly attend to gratitude, curiosity, or creation, those channels grow robust and the music shifts. Practice makes groove. Set aside small experiments. For 5 minutes, let the needle rest only on the present breath. Observe the difference in what you notice. In social settings, drop the needle wholly on the person in front of you, not on your reply, not on your phone, and watch the quality of connection change. At work, give deliberate attention to one problem, as if it were the only record in the room. When you do, parts of the solution that were previously invisible begin to resonate. Do not fool yourself that attention alone rewrites destiny. The needle cannot make music from a broken record, but it can choose which records are played. And it can encourage mastering those records that serve the life you intend. The practice of skillful attention is not a flight from difficulty. It is the small, patient discipline of placing the needle where creation is possible. So cultivate the habit of mindful placing. Train the needle to drop with purpose and to rest without anxiety. When attention becomes an art, your life's record begins to play new music. Music born of choices, both subtle and profound. We carry a story about ourselves that feels immovable, a center, a name, a biography. We gather memories and stitch them into a garment called identity, and wear it as if it were skin. Yet that garment is woven from language and memory, not from an irreducible core. If reality at small scales is a field of possibilities, then the I that we clutch is one possible pattern among many. Understanding this loosens the iron grip of ego and opens the door to more fluid creative participation. Consider identity as a constantly updating narrative. Memories, impressions, social roles, and repeated words all conspire to create a stable narrative. It feels safe because stability is predictable. But the adherence to a single story constrains the range of experiences and, importantly, the kinds of quantum outcomes you bias. The mind that believes, I am always anxious, for instance, places attention in anxious grooves, and thus tends to collapse more outcomes into anxious forms. The mind that sees itself as curious and open tilts toward different probabilities. Here is the liberating fact. Identity is malleable. It can be shifted by small acts of reattending. If you change the narrative consistently, the world begins to answer. This is not mystical fluff. Habitual attention rewires neural pathways and organizes behavior into new patterns. Those patterns, in turn, affect how you measure the world. The feedback loops between nervous system, attention, and external results are real and measurable. This matters because many people wait for identity to change before they act. They say, when I become confident, I will pursue that, or when I am healed, then I'll take the step. But in the quantum observer model, action and identity are reciprocally linked. You don't only act because you are, you become because you act. Small acts of bravery, tiny decisions to dwell on different aspects of experience. Act like experiments that alter the probability field around you, and therefore the unfolding identity. Try this technique. For a week, choose one small domain: conversation style, posture, the stories you tell, and deliberately act as if a slightly different you already exists. Speak from that identity in the micro interactions of your day. Notice how people's responses, your thoughts, and your attention shift. The physical brain will begin to instantiate the new pattern, and the quantum tendency of events will notice the new calibration. This awareness does not erase the past nor pretend pain away. Rather, it recognizes that adherence to a rigid self is a practical obstacle to creative living. When you loosen the belief in a single fixed identity, you gain mobility. You can place your attention, like a sculptor's chisel, and reveal previously hidden possibilities. The practical upshot is simple. If you want different outcomes, practice being a slightly different person, not in fantasy, but in repeated, small experiments that reshape both the mind and the field it observes. We think of thoughts as private, internal chatter that merely reflect the world. But what if thoughts are not merely echoes, but participatory actions? Imagine every thought as a pebble thrown into a pond. The pebble's ripple affects other ripples. It interferes, amplifies, dampens. At the quantum scale, the act of observation changes the system. In our day-to-day life, the mechanics are more subtle, but no less real. Thoughts are energetic events that bias the field towards certain configurations. This reframing changes ethics and practice. If thoughts are actions, then mental discipline matters because it shapes consequences. Ruminative thoughts that repeatedly imagine failure do more than make you feel bad. They bias attention, change physiology, and influence the likelihood of encountering self-fulfilling events. Conversely, imaginative, constructive thoughts can act as seeds that find fertile soil in the mind's field and grow into behaviors and outcomes. The practical challenge is that thoughts arise unconsciously, like weather patterns. You do not conjure every breeze. The remedy is not to force silence, but to become an attentive gardener. Notice the thought, name it, and then choose whether to water it. Cultivating awareness of thought's quality, its timbre, its habitual direction, helps you decide what to amplify. Let us talk technique. One useful practice: mental rehearsal as calibration. Athletes use visualization not as escape, but to prime neurophysiology for performance. Similarly, when you mentally rehearse an outcome with vivid sensory detail and an emotional register congruent with success, you bias attention and body toward the actions that manifest that outcome. The quantum field, insofar as it responds to patterns of attention, finds a template ready to be collapsed into reality. But beware. Visualization without embodied action is a hollow ritual. Thought as action must be married to small, concrete behaviors. Think of thought as setting the aim, and behavior as pulling the trigger. The combination increases the probability that the desired card will be chosen from the deck. Another practical tool is meta-cognition, the ability to notice not only thoughts, but the fact of thinking. Meta-cognition introduces a gap between stimulus and response, a place where you can apply intention. In that gap, choose which thought to follow and which to let go. This is the laboratory where mental actions become deliberate, rather than automatic. Thus, honoring thought as a form of action empowers you to take responsibility for inner life? It is not about policing every stray notion into purity. It is about recognizing that repeated patterns of attention, the thoughts you habitually run, have causal weight in your lived experience. Once you accept that reality, you can begin to steer the currents rather than be swept along. If attention is the needle and thought is an action, then emotion is the amplifier, the knob that turns a whisper into a broadcast. Emotions are not mere reactions, they are field modifiers. Joy widens perception, fear narrows it. The same situation interpreted with different emotional charge yields different outcomes, because emotion changes the physiology, which changes behavior, which changes the pattern of attention, and therefore, the probabilities that get selected. This is why spiritual traditions insist on working with the heart as much as the mind. It's not sentimental, it's practical. When your emotional register is steady and open, you become a broader instrument. You permit more possibilities to approach your attention. When your register is constricted, you act like a camera with a narrow aperture, admitting only a thin slice of experience, and the world responds in kind. So how do we work with emotion without becoming their slave? First, notice their role as amplifiers rather than judges. When sorrow arises, do not treat it as failure. Treat it as a signal about how your system is currently tuned. Label it, feel it, but do not let it dominate the long-term setting of your attention. Second, cultivate practices that stabilize emotional amplitude, breath, rhythm, movement, and ritual. These are not mere relaxation tricks, they are tools for reconfiguring the amplifier. Third, purposefully harness emotion to fuel intention. Intention without feeling is like a cold motor. When you link a clear intention to an embodied feeling, gratitude, fierce clarity, calm determination, you supply the field with a charged template. That template is more likely to attract congruent events, because action becomes magnetized by feeling. The world does not respond to cold plans as reliably as it does to lived, felt aims, a concrete practice. Choose a small goal and feel the emotional state of its completion as if it were happening now. Feel the gratitude, the quiet pleasure, the steady pride. Let that feeling inhabit your body for moments each day. These emotional rehearsals create a resonant frequency that your behavior and environment begin to match. Finally, be compassionate with negative emotion. Fear and grief are not enemies to be stamped out, but teachers to be integrated. When you hold them with clarity, they disclose where your attention has been neglectful or where patterns need recalibration. Integration reduces their erratic amplification and allows you to redirect the amplifier toward more fruitful possibilities. Emotion is not a mystery to be feared, but a power to be stewarded. Learn the craft: notice, name, harness, integrate. When done well, the amplifier becomes an ally, turning small acts of attention into impactful shifts in lived reality. Habit is the architecture of a life. It shapes the skeleton upon which events hang. Just as initial conditions determine trajectories in physics, the habits you establish bias every subsequent moment. Attention and intention act as the foreman of that architecture, setting the blueprints by repeated small choices. The physics of habit is simple: repetition deepens groove, and groove deepens propensity. To change outcomes, you must change the early, small steps that set trajectories. This is the intersection of psychology and quantum participation. A single act matters less than the pattern created by many small acts. Habits are the cumulative measurement settings of your personal laboratory. If you habitually measure reality with suspicion, the architecture of your life will lean toward validation of that suspicion. If you habitually measure with curiosity, new doors appear more often. So how do you redesign habit without brittle willpower? First, focus on micro-habits, tiny, nearly effortless moves that are easy to perform consistently. The body loves small wins. A micro-habit repeated daily produces a stable change because it bypasses the resistance that large edicts create. Second, attach habits to anchors in your environment. The scientist who writes notes on the morning coffee table, the writer who opens a blank document at the same time every day. These external anchors cue internal states until the act becomes automatic. Third, use attention intentionally at the moment of habit. Habits become most pliable in the small window when you're about to act. That is the moment of measurement. Instead of autopiloting, take breath, set a micro-intention, and then act. Over time, the measure with intent replaces the measure. Without intent, you are not merely performing a mechanical routine. You are calibrating the field. Fourth, anticipate friction and design around it. If your environment pulls you toward old grooves, change the environment. Remove easy triggers of distraction. Add cues for the habits you want. Habit change is less heroic than clever. Align your surroundings with the life you intend. Fifth, understand identity loops. Habit shapes identity, and identity shapes habit. Use this loop as leverage. Claim a small identity. I'm the kind of person who wakes at 600 and enact tiny behaviors that confirm it. The confirmation rebuilds your self-narrative and thus changes the measurement settings going forward. The quantum-minded practitioner works with these mechanics not as mystical magic, but as sober engineering of experience. You create initial conditions through disciplined micro-habits, then let the compound interest of repetition play out. Over months and years, the probability landscape around you tilts toward the life your daily measurements favor. Habits are the slow, patient alchemy of attention and intention. Treat them as such, and you will find the improbable becoming probable, not by force, but by the steady shaping of conditions, moment by moment. Surrender is often misunderstood to mean resignation, but surrender, properly understood, is a strategic letting go that clears the clutter of unnecessary force. Non-resistance is not passivity. It is a subtle redirection of energy away from futile friction toward creative alignment. In the laboratory of reality, friction wastes attention and distorts measurements. Letting go of needless resistance frees attention to notice new options. Consider how resistance works. You push against a state, and the push hardens it. Psychological experiments show that tension breeds more tension, emotionally and energetically. Resistance constricts the field and narrows possibilities. Conversely, when you stop pushing, the system can reconfigure. Think of a stuck drawer. Prying harder often jams it. A gentle alignment releases it. Surrender is a finely honed art. It begins with radical acceptance. Meet the present without fighting the fact of its existence. Acceptance does not mean you give up on goals. It means you stop wasting energy on denying present reality and invest that energy in the next creative step. The paradox is that by stopping the useless fight, you become more effective at changing conditions that truly matter. There is also a neuroscientific backbone to this. States of calm openness Allow prefrontal executive functions to operate more fluidly. Creativity flashes when tension loosens. When you cling to an outcome with anxious force, you narrow the bandwidth of perception. When you relax, you widen it. A practical approach practice: active surrender. Start by naming the point of resistance. A relationship, an idea, a habit. Breathe into it until the bodily grip softens. Then ask a different question. Instead of, "How do I force this?" ask, "What small step can I take now that respects what is true and moves me forward?" Act from that place. The act is neither capitulation nor brute force. It is a creative recalibration. Another technique is rhythmic letting. Alternate focused effort with deliberate release. Work intensely for a block of time. Then stop and do something unrelated and restful. These oscillations mimic natural cycles and prevent the burnout that makes attention blunt and reactive. In these restful phases, new insights often arise. The field reorganizes in ways that frantic pushing never allows. Surrender also includes permission to be wrong. Perfectionism is a kind of resistance that blocks experimentation. When you allow missteps, you allow learning, and you open the field to serendipitous corrections. Quantum systems thrive on variation. Rigid control collapses richness. So treat surrender as a craft. Accept what is, take a small, wise action, then release attachment to immediate outcomes. Over time, this rhythm trains attention to be both decisive and open. A rare combination that steers probability without strangling possibility. There is an old prejudice that divides science from mysticism, as if they were rival camps. But when you look carefully at the frontiers of physics and the depths of contemplative practice, a surprising affinity appears. Both speak, in their different tongues, of a reality that is not strictly solid and separate but participatory and relational. Science provides the language of probability and measurement. Mysticism provides the disciplined practice of attention and interior knowing. Together, they form a practical map for anyone who wants to engage life with both rigor and wonder. Physicists who study the quantum domain speak of non-locality, entanglement, and the role of the observer. Mystics, across cultures, have spoken of interbeing, the dissolution of a hard self, and the active role of presence. These are not identical descriptions, but they are complementary. Science offers hypotheses and careful tools. Spirituality offers methods for changing interior states that, in practical life, alter outward behavior and thus measurement conditions. Combining them yields powerful leverage. You can learn how to calibrate attention with the precision of contemplative method while honoring experimental humility. What does this communion look like day to day? It looks like integrating meditation and rigorous hypothesis testing. Make an intention. Design small experiments to test how attention shifts outcomes, measure results honestly, and refine the approach. This is not faith without verification. It is playful, skeptical practice that treats inner life as a lab. Another concrete overlap is the language of systems. Complexity theory, network science, and ecology show that wholes behave differently than sums of parts. Mystical traditions have always emphasized the web of relations. No man is an island, in practical terms. When you begin to notice the web, how your mood affects others, how your attention shifts group dynamics, you realize that your local measurements influence non-local phenomena. The union of science and mysticism also demands intellectual humility. Quantum mechanics, does not magically turn you into a wish-fulfilling machine. Rather, it invites you into disciplined co-creation. The mystical path demands ethical clarity. If attention is a tool of creation, we must wield it responsibly. Combine curiosity with compassion. Practice exercises that marry the two. Take a hypothesis about your life day, for example. When I begin conversations by listening, meetings become more productive. Design a small trial across several days, keep a log, and then analyze. Mix contemplative technique, breathing, grounding, mindful presence, with the rigor of measurement. Over time, you will develop a kind of embodied epistemology, a practical way of knowing that includes both inner attunement and external verification. This communion is not an abstract reconciliation. It is a pragmatic alliance that gives you both means and method, the inner discipline to direct attention, and the experimental rigor to see what actually shifts. With these together, you become a careful, creative agent in a responsive universe.